I'm Aaron Mace. I'm 38 years old, and I served as a captain in the United States Army for over a decade. For most of my life, I believed that sacrifice was the same as love. That giving everything I had for my family was what made me a good son, a good man, and eventually, a good soldier. I thought carrying everyone's burden meant I was strong. But the truth is, I was just the only one who didn't know how to say no. I grew up in Colorado, in a small town where everyone knew your name and your father's debts. We were a working-class family. My dad bounced between jobs, my mom worked nights at the hospital, and I was the eldest of three. Being the oldest meant being responsible. It meant making sure there was food in the fridge, even if that meant skipping dinner myself. It meant helping my little sister with homework, even after long shifts at the auto shop in high school. It meant staying quiet when my parents argued and pretending I didn't notice how tired mom looked or how frustrated dad got when he couldn't fix things. When I enlisted, it wasn't just about duty to my country. It was a way out. But more than that, it was a way to send money home, to make sure my sister got through college and my parents didn't lose the house. Every deployment, every tour, every risk I took, it always came with the thought that at least they were okay. That my pain meant something. And for a long time, I believed it did. I thought that if I gave enough, eventually I'd be seen. That someone would say thank you, but they never did. Not really. And after what happened last year, I finally had to face the truth. Sacrifice isn't always noble. Sometimes it's just quiet suffering in disguise. And this is the story of how I stopped choosing them and finally started choosing myself. My first deployment was to Kandahar. I was 27 and green, not just to combat, but to distance. I still remember the first time I wired money home, $800. Dad had gotten laid off again, and the mortgage was 2 months behind. No one asked. I just did it. That's what being the oldest meant. You fill the gaps, even if no one sees you do it. That pattern didn't stop. Every base I landed on, every country I rotated through, I had a standing order with the bank. A third of my paycheck went home, sometimes more when things got rough. Afghanistan turned into Germany, then to South Korea. I watched the world through checkpoints and barracks windows, and every 2 weeks I made sure mom had enough for her insulin, that Briar could afford her textbooks, that the roof back home didn't collapse after the last snowstorm. It became routine, like brushing your teeth. You don't think about it, you just do it. They'd call sometimes, not often. Holidays mostly. And even then, it felt more like an obligation than affection. I'd ask about their week. They'd tell me how Briar got into another honors program, how dad was coaching baseball again. I never expected them to ask about what I was doing. Maybe it was easier that way. Maybe I didn't want to tell them what it felt like to hold a rifle longer than a hug. The strange thing is, I didn't resent it. Not then. There was something noble about disappearing for the sake of someone else's comfort, like I could swallow the cold if it meant they never had to feel it. I remember being stationed in Osan and getting a photo of Briar in her graduation gown. Her smile filled the screen. I stared at it for 5 minutes before noticing that no one had written me a message with it. Just the image. No, thank you. No, wish you were here. Still, I saved it. Every year, on my birthday, I'd get a generic e-card. Sometimes, there were years they forgot. I stopped checking after a while. One time, the guys from my unit threw me a surprise. They taped up a poster board that read, "Happy Birthday, Captain Mac," even though they got my name wrong. Still, it meant more than anything I ever got from home. There were nights I'd sit alone in the barracks with a cup of coffee and wonder if I'd made the right call staying in so long. But I always talked myself out of it. I'd say this is just what good sons do. They give. They don't count the cost. Mom's health got worse during my third tour. Dad said she couldn't afford her new meds, so I started sending extra. I gave up my car back home and sold some of my old equipment. When Briar wanted to study abroad for a semester, I said yes before she even asked. I told her she deserved to see the world. I never mentioned how I hadn't seen the inside of a real home in years. They sent pictures from Paris. Mom wearing a beret, Dad in some touristy striped shirt, Briar holding a glass of wine at a tiny cafe. I double-tapped, closed the app, and went back to sorting intel reports. That was the year I forgot my own birthday, too. Sometimes, when we had downtime, my squad would sit around trading stories. They'd talk about their wives, their kids, the way their moms still mailed them care packages like it was 1995. When it was my turn, I'd say something vague, didn't want to kill the mood. Didn't want to say out loud that the only care package I'd gotten in 10 years was one I sent myself by mistake. I think the moment it really hit me was during a sandstorm in Bagram. We were stuck inside for 14 hours, and I pulled out an old notebook just to pass the time. I started listing every expense I'd covered since I enlisted. Rent, medical bills, school fees, flights, groceries, cable. It filled 2 pages. I remember staring at the total and thinking, I've spent more on them than I have on myself. And still, I don't know if they'd notice if I vanished. But I kept going. Not out of obligation, out of some kind of quiet hope that one day, I'd come home, and they'd see me. Really see me. Maybe they'd sit me down and say they were proud. That they knew what I'd given up. That all those years away hadn't made me invisible. But that day never came. It was always just the next bill. The next wire transfer. The next call started with, "Aaron, we hate to ask, but," and I always said yes. Until one day, I didn't. I hadn't been home in over a year. No calls, no messages, just a growing silence that settled into routine. So, when my deployment ended early and I had 2 weeks of leave, I didn't tell anyone. I figured I'd surprise them. I thought maybe walking through that front door unannounced would be one of those rare warm moments I could store away for when the world got cold again. But when I pulled up to the house, it was empty. No car in the driveway, no lights in the windows, just the soft hum of the porch light flickering like it had forgotten what it was supposed to be doing. I let myself in with the same key I'd used since high school. Nothing had changed. Same cracked tile in the hallway, same framed school photo of Briar smiling with braces from a decade ago. Everything looked lived in, but no one was there. I dropped my duffel near the stairs and went to the kitchen, hoping there'd at least be a note. There wasn't. Just a stack of unopened mail and a grocery list on the fridge that looked like it had been there for weeks. Then I saw it. An envelope, half tucked under a pile of coupons, ivory cardstock with gold lettering. A wedding invitation. I read it twice before my brain caught up. Briar was getting married. In Tuscany. The ceremony was in 6 days. My name wasn't on it. Not as a guest, not even in the family section, nothing. I sat at the table and just stared at it, like the paper might somehow explain itself. Later that evening, I got a message from Mom. She said they were in New York for the week, flying out to Italy tomorrow. She mentioned how excited Briar was, how beautiful the villa looked. I waited for her to say something about me. She didn't. So I asked why no one told me. Her reply came 10 minutes later. "We didn't think you'd be able to come," she wrote. "You're always so busy." I stared at those words until they blurred. Busy. That's what I was to them. Not important, not invited, just busy. Like my absence was expected, even preferred. I called Briar, thinking maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she'd explain it differently. She picked up, but her voice was distant, like I'd caught her in the middle of something more interesting. She said the wedding was small, intimate, just immediate friends and family. I almost laughed at that. I wanted to ask what she thought I was. I wanted to remind her who paid for her study abroad, her car, and her last semester. But the words stuck in my throat. She said she had to go and hung up without asking how I was, without even saying goodbye. I sat there for a long time after, in that quiet house that no longer felt like mine. Every wall echoed with the kind of emptiness you don't come back from. That night I didn't sleep. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow circles. It hit me somewhere around 3 a.m. I wasn't family anymore. I was a resource. A ghost that mailed checks and disappeared. And in that moment, something shifted, something broke. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just felt cold. Colder than I'd ever been in a desert or a bunker. Because this time, the people who left me out were the ones I thought I was fighting for. I couldn't sleep, so I opened my laptop and logged into the joint account I had set up years ago with Mom. Back then, it made sense. She could pay bills, handle emergencies, and I wouldn't have to wire money every week. But I hadn't checked it in months. Maybe longer. I always trusted it was being used for what we agreed on. The balance was lower than it should have been. A lot lower. I scrolled through the transactions. Over the last 18 months, withdrawals had been made in increasing amounts. 500 here, 1,000 there. Then charges from luxury travel agencies, high-end boutiques, and catering services with Italian addresses. At first, I thought maybe there was a mistake. Maybe someone had stolen the card. But the names on the vendors matched what I saw on the invitation. Villa Rosa, Firenze Bridal, Alessi Group Catering. It wasn't a mistake. I felt nothing at first. Not anger, not betrayal, just clarity, cold and sharp, like a cracked windshield finally giving way. I started organizing the transactions by category: travel, venue, dresses, food, flights, hotels. It wasn't just my savings, it was every deployment bonus, every hazard pay deposit, every unspent holiday allowance. Gone, transformed into white flowers, imported wine, and honeymoon flights I was never supposed to know about. I downloaded the statements, labeled every file by month, and copied them into a folder titled, "For Clarity." I wasn't looking for a fight, I just needed facts. Proof that what I'd suspected in that quiet kitchen wasn't paranoia. It was true, and it had receipts. I opened a new email, no introduction, no apology, just a subject line. About the account, I attached the folder, wrote one line, "I know now," and I'm done. Then I hit send. Next, I called the bank, removed my name from the joint account, reset all online passwords, canceled the card, and opened a new personal account. The rep on the phone asked if I'd like to file a fraud report. I told her no, it wasn't fraud, it was family. When I hung up, I didn't feel relief, I felt hollow. Like I'd just walked out of a building I'd spent my life helping build, only to turn around and realize they'd bricked over the door. I wasn't angry, I was finished, and finishing has its own kind of weight. It doesn't shout, it doesn't slam doors, it just leaves. That night, I packed my things, not because I had anywhere to go, but because I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. Everything in it smelled like someone else's joy, paid for with pieces of me. I left a sticky note on the fridge. Nothing dramatic, just my name and the date. I wanted them to know exactly when they lost me, not out of spite, but so no one could pretend they didn't see it coming. Sometimes ending something doesn't look like fire. It looks like silence, like closing a laptop, locking a door, walking away without turning back. And that's what I did. The invitation came 2 days after the wedding. A text from Mom asking if I'd join them for dinner. No explanation, no apology, just a time and a place. I almost didn't go, but curiosity has its own kind of pull. I needed to see their faces. I needed to hear them say it. They were already seated when I arrived. The same table we'd always used for birthdays, anniversaries, and every forced celebration over the years. There was a roast in the center, wine glasses half full, cloth napkins folded too neatly, like they were trying too hard to make the night look normal. But nothing felt normal. Mom smiled like nothing happened. Dad poured me a drink like he hadn't drained my account. And Briar barely looked up from her phone. I waited until we finished the main course. Let them talk about the wedding, the food, how perfect everything had turned out. I listened, nodded, let them fill the space with their version of joy. Then I pulled out the envelope, printed copies of the bank statements. I placed them on the table, page by page, not saying a word. One for each month. One for every withdrawal they thought I'd never notice. The room went quiet. You could hear the ceiling fan clicking. Mom was the first to speak. She called it a misunderstanding, said the expenses got mixed up, that they meant to repay me. Dad leaned back and called me dramatic, told me I was blowing things out of proportion. Said it wasn't like I needed the money, that I'd been gone so long, I forgot what family looked like. Then it came, the word, ungrateful. He said I was ungrateful. After everything they'd done for me, after the roof they'd kept over my head, after the love they gave, even when I was too distant to return it. I stared at him, wondering which part he believed. That love was something you measure in guilt. That debt was what kept families together. I didn't yell. I didn't explain. I just turned to Briar and asked if she knew. She didn't answer at first. But then she reached for one of the pages. Her eyes scanned it slowly. I watched her mouth tighten, then tremble. She looked up and asked Mom if it was true. Asked if the wedding had been paid for with my money. Mom hesitated. That was enough. Briar pushed back her chair. She stood without saying another word and walked out. A minute later, my phone buzzed. It was a transfer notification, the entire amount. Sent back in full. No note, just the number, just silence. Dad cursed under his breath. Mom tried to follow Briar, but I didn't move. I sat there, hands in my lap, feeling something uncoil inside me. Not anger, not even relief, just space. Like I'd finally made room for air in a life that had been too full of noise. I stood, picked up the pages, slid them back into the envelope. I told them I wasn't angry. I just couldn't carry them anymore. I said I hoped one day they'd understand why that dinner would be our last. Then I left. Outside, the air felt colder than I remembered. But it was clean, and for the first time in years, I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking toward myself. I moved to Texas not because I had a plan, but because it felt far enough. The sky was wide, the air was quiet, and no one there knew what I'd lost. I rented a small house outside Austin, the kind with creaky steps and a porch swing that faced the sunrise. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I could sit still and hear myself think. I got a job helping a local vet run supply logistics. It was simple, steady work that didn't ask too much of me. Some days, I didn't say more than a few words. Other days, I found myself talking to strangers like old friends. There was a quiet rhythm to it. Coffee at dawn, work until 3, long walks in the evening. And sleep, real sleep, without dreams of desert winds or empty homes. One afternoon, I ran into Marcus, a guy I trained with in Fort Hood. He recognized me before I could fake a smile. We got lunch. Then dinner a week later. He introduced me to his wife, their dog, and slowly his circle became mine. They didn't ask for war stories. They didn't bring up family. They just let me exist, and that was enough. 2 months after I left Colorado, I got a letter, handwritten, from Briar. She didn't say much, just that she was sorry, that she had known, deep down, but didn't want to face it, that choosing silence was easier than choosing me. She ended with one line I still read sometimes when the nights get too quiet. I see you now. I should have always. I didn't write back. Not yet. But I folded the letter and kept it in a drawer by my bed. It was the first thing I'd been given by my family that felt real in years. Not money, not guilt, just words, honest ones. Texas gave me space. Not just from them, but from the version of myself I'd been for so long. The soldier, the provider, the invisible backbone. And in that distance, I started to rebuild. Not with grand plans, just with soft mornings, honest friendships, and a quiet kind of peace that comes when no one is expecting you to bleed for them. I wasn't whole yet, but I wasn't broken anymore either. I was something in between, and for now, that was enough. I still carry their name. I still remember the way my mom used to hum while washing dishes, the way my dad taught me how to tie a tie before my first ROTC banquet, and the way Briar used to fall asleep in the back seat during road trips. Those memories are mine, and I don't need to burn them to feel free. I'm still their son, but I'm not their soldier anymore. There was a time when I thought loyalty meant silence. That love was proven by how much pain you could hold without letting it spill over. But I've learned that true love doesn't ask you to disappear for its convenience. It doesn't spend your life like spare change. It sees you. It holds you without keeping you small. Walking away from them wasn't easy. It still aches sometimes, like an old wound you forget about until the weather turns. But I don't regret it. I chose myself. And in doing that, I opened the door to people and places that see me as more than a paycheck, more than a role to play. If you've ever felt like the only one giving, like you were pouring from a cup no one bothered to refill, maybe it's time to ask why. Perhaps it's time to choose peace over obligation. You don't owe your life to people just because they call you family. So let me ask you something. Have you ever sacrificed too much for someone who never saw you? If you have, you're not alone. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to come home to yourself.